The courthouse buzzed with noise. Footsteps echoed off marble floors. Phones buzzed. Coffee cups clinked against tired hands. Monday morning. Another day of motions, hearings, and judgments. People rushed past each other, suits crisply pressed, briefcases swinging, badges flashing, and then he walked in. Marcus Reed. Hoodie pulled over his head. Dark jeans. Boots that had seen more sidewalks than boardrooms. No briefcase, no security detail, no outward signs of power. Just a slow, steady walk toward the security checkpoint. The guards tensed the second they saw him. Maybe it was the hoodie. Maybe it was the calm swagger. Maybe it was their own assumptions. Didn't matter. They reacted. A tall security officer stepped forward, hand raised. "Sir, step aside." Marcus paused, looked him dead in the eyes. Didn't flinch. Didn't argue. Simply slid his hands out of his hoodie pocket, open, empty, peaceful, and stepped where they told him to. The officer patted him down roughly, too roughly, as if searching for a reason not to trust him. Other guards watched, arms crossed, suspicious eyes darting. A couple of lawyers nearby muttered under their breath. Bet he's here for a sentencing. Or worse. Marcus said nothing. He just smiled. A small, knowing smile. The kind of smile that says, "You have no idea who you're talking to." Once cleared, Marcus moved through the metal detector. No weapons, no contraband. Just dignity, which somehow seemed to threaten them more than anything else. He entered the main lobby. High ceilings, flags hanging from brass poles, the heavy smell of paper and old wood. People everywhere, clerks, defendants, prosecutors, buzzing like bees around. A hive, and every single one of them stared, some with open suspicion, some with casual dismissal, none with welcome. Marcus moved past them, slow, calm, like a man who had all the time in the world. At the far end of the lobby, he found an empty bench, sat down, folded his hands, waited. 2 young attorneys walked by. One nudged the other and laughed. Probably here for his bail hearing. They didn't lower their voices. They didn't hide their smirks. Because when the world decides what you are based on your clothes, your skin, your posture, they think they don't have to hide their judgment. Marcus leaned back against the bench, watched the clock tick slowly, and smiled again. Because what they didn't know, what none of them knew, was that in less than an hour, they wouldn't. Just see him differently. They would see themselves differently. He closed his eyes for a moment, breathed in, breathed out, and let them keep whispering. Because some lessons aren't taught with raised voices, they're taught with presence. And Marcus Reed was about to teach them all, without saying a single unnecessary word, before the stares, before the whispers, before the mistaken pat-down at security. Marcus Reed had already fought battles far louder than any hallway full of lawyers could ever produce. He was born on the south side of Chicago. Single mother. 2 brothers. 1 bedroom. He grew up not with a silver spoon, but with grit sharpened by necessity. By 10, he knew how to navigate a city bus alone. By 12, he knew how to cross gang lines without starting a fight. By 14, he had seen more funerals than birthday parties. The world told him early, boys like you don't get far. Boys like you either end up behind bars or under white sheets. But Marcus, he had other plans. It started in the library. The only place where the noise outside didn't follow. Books became his weapons. Words became his shield. Devoured history, politics, law, page after page after page. Not because he wanted to escape, but because he wanted to understand. Understand why power worked the way it did. Understand how systems protected some and crushed others. By 17, he had a full scholarship to Howard University. He packed his life into a battered duffel bag, And when his neighbors asked him what he planned to do with all that book learning, he simply said, "Change the room I walk into." Howard molded him, not into something new, but into a sharper version of what he already was. He wasn't interested in fitting in. He was interested in standing firm. Then came law school, top of his class, offers from fancy white shoe. Firms poured in, big money, big titles. Marcus turned them all down because he didn't want to defend corporations. He wanted to defend people who looked like him, people who never got a second glance unless they were being judged. By 30, he was one of the most respected civil rights attorneys in the state. By 35, he had argued in front of the Supreme Court. And by 38, he had been appointed by the governor as one of the youngest federal judges in state history. But Marcus never traded in his hoodie, never traded in his sneakers, because clothes don't change character. And perception? Perception was a battle he had already won, long before he ever put on a robe. He knew walking into that courthouse that morning in his jeans and hoodie would make people squirm, would make security tense, would make whispered judgments buzz, and he welcomed it. Because the world needed to be uncomfortable. Growth only happens when assumptions crack open. Marcus didn't need to raise his voice, didn't need to flash his badge or drop his title. He had learned something more powerful. Let the truth hit them harder than you ever could. So he sat there, waiting on that wooden bench, letting them build their own narrative, brick by brick, word by word, because soon they were going to have to tear it down themselves. And Marcus, he would just be standing there, quiet, unshaken, smiling. The marble floor gleamed under fluorescent lights. The courthouse lobby never really changed. Same cold walls, same scuffed benches, same hurried steps. But today, the whispers were louder than usual. It started near the security checkpoint. 2 paralegals, arms full of folders, glanced at Marcus and snickered. "Bet he's here for a violation hearing." "Yeah, or a custody case." They didn't lower their voices, because when you look the way Marcus did that morning, hoodie, jeans, worn boots, they thought he couldn't possibly hear them, or worse, they didn't care if he did. By the clerk's desk, a middle-aged attorney in a blue suit leaned toward his junior partner. "I don't know why they even let guys like that loiter around here." The partner laughed, shuffling his case files. "Gotta keep security on their toes somehow." Marcus sat, still, steady, listening, not with anger, but with an almost clinical curiosity, like a surgeon observing symptoms before a diagnosis. A bailiff passed by, gave him a long, slow stare. Hand rested on his duty belt just a second longer than necessary. Marcus caught the look, knew it by heart. Be ready to explain yourself. Be ready to justify why you're standing here. Even if you're doing nothing wrong, even if you're exactly where you're supposed to be. The clock above the doors ticked, tick, tick, tick. 10 minutes until court opened. Another group arrived, a young woman in a gray pencil skirt and red lipstick. Pointed subtly at Marcus as she whispered to her colleague, "Maybe he's the defendant on the Simmons case." "Wouldn't surprise me." They laughed, not meanly, but with that casual cruelty that bubbles up when people think your existence is the punchline. Marcus checked his watch. 15 more minutes. Plenty of time. Plenty of space for them to build their narratives. Brick by careless. Brick. Someone dropped a coffee lid near him. The young man bent down to pick it up, gave Marcus a sideways glance and smirked. "Good luck, man." Marcus tilted his head slightly, not in thanks, in acknowledgement, because he knew they weren't wishing him luck for a court victory. They were wishing him luck for surviving whatever charges they thought he was here to face. At the far end of the hallway, the main courtroom doors creaked open. The bailiffs started lining up defendants, young men in jumpsuits, chains clinking at their ankles. The clerks called out names. Families leaned forward anxiously. Lawyers flipped through last-minute notes, and, in the middle of it all, Marcus sat, unmoving, untouched, unbothered, because he understood something critical. When people assume your story, you don't argue. You let the ending surprise them. And the ending they were about to see would rewrite everything they thought they knew about power, respect, and what a thug really looks like. Tick, tick, tick. The clock struck 9. The bailiff called out over the intercom, "All rise for the honorable judge," but they didn't say the name yet. Not yet. That moment was coming, and it would hit harder than any assumption whispered in that lobby. The doors swung open fully. The buzz of the hallway pulled toward the courtroom like gravity. A bailiff, young, broad-shouldered, full of authority he hadn't yet earned, strode through the lobby, scanning the crowd, clipboard in hand, eyes sharp. Chin high, he spotted Marcus almost immediately. Hoodie, boots, dark skin, no briefcase, no suit. His brain made the jump before his training could catch up. Assumption loaded, trigger pulled. The bailiff marched over, short, clipped steps, boots thudding, against the tile. He stopped just a few feet away from Marcus, pointed at him with the clipboard like a weapon. "You, on your feet." Marcus looked up, calm, silent, waiting. "Defendants line up at the door," the bailiff barked. "Court's about to start. You know the drill." A few people nearby smirked. One woman in a navy suit actually chuckled under her breath. Because, to them it was obvious. Hoodie equals defendant. Brown skin equals trouble. Sitting alone equals guilty. Simple math, simple minds. Marcus slowly rose, not because he was ordered to, because he was ready. The bailiff waved the clipboard again. "Move it." Marcus tucked his hands into his pockets, tilted his head slightly, and asked, voice low, smooth, "Is that how you address every officer of the court?" The bailiff blinked, processing, confused for half a second, then scoffed. "Officer of the court, please. Save it for the judge." The crowd near the door laughed, another small, careless cruelty. Marcus smiled, a real smile this time, not bitter, patient, like a man watching dominoes lean, knowing exactly when they're going to fall. A clerk by the double doors checked her watch, tapped the microphone, and finally, the words echoed through the lobby. "All rise for the Honorable Judge Marcus." Read. Silence. Crushing. Instant. You could hear the hum of the overhead lights, the click of a distant pen dropping, the soft intake of breath from 100 stunned mouths. The bailiff froze, eyes wide, hand still half extended with the clipboard, face draining of color. Marcus didn't flinch, didn't gloat. He simply stepped, past the young bailiff, calm, collected, commanding. He walked through the stunned crowd, past the smirking attorneys, past the whispering clerks, past the wide-eyed defendants, up the polished steps to the bench. There, waiting neatly, was his robe. Black. Simple. Weighty with meaning. Marcus slipped it on in one fluid motion, transformed not by the robe itself, but by the truth it revealed. He sat, adjusted the microphone, and looked out over the sea of faces. Faces that had, minutes ago, dismissed him as nothing. Faces that now couldn't meet his gaze. He tapped the mic once, cleared his throat, and with a voice full of steel and sun said, "Let's begin." The dominoes had fallen, and Marcus was already building something stronger from the ruins of their assumptions. The words, "Let's begin," still echoed in the air. But no one moved. No one shuffled papers. No one coughed. The entire courtroom seemed paralyzed. The attorneys along the front benches blinked rapidly, as if they were waking from a bad dream they couldn't explain. The security guards at the back, the same ones who frisked Marcus roughly an hour ago, shifted awkwardly on their feet. The bailiff who had barked orders at him? He stared at his clipboard like it might save him, and Victoria Marsh, the assistant district attorney who had laughed earlier, sat frozen, one hand gripping her pen so tightly her knuckles turned white. She looked everywhere except directly at Marcus, because to look would mean acknowledging what she had assumed. Marcus scanned the room, slowly, deliberately, not to intimidate, not to humiliate, but to mark the moment when perception cracked, when image crumbled, when truth stood up and demanded to be seen. He leaned slightly forward, speaking into the microphone, voice calm, measured, unflinching. Today's docket includes preliminary hearings, bond arguments, and 3 suppression motions. But before we proceed, he paused, let the stillness thicken. I feel compelled to address an issue that arose this morning. Several heads lifted at once. Tension crackled like static between them. Marcus continued. It has come to my attention that certain behaviors, certain assumptions, were made about individuals before even a word was spoken. He let that sentence breathe. Let it find its mark in every chest. Assumptions based on clothing, based on posture, based on skin. The room stayed deathly still. Only the clock on the wall dared to keep ticking. Marcus sat back, hands folded, expression unreadable. As officers of this court, you are held to a higher standard. That standard does not begin when the judge takes the bench. It begins the moment you enter this building. A ripple of shame rolled through the gallery. Some attorneys shifted in their seats, some glanced sideways, hoping not to be noticed. Others stared straight ahead, faces flushing with the weight of unspoken apologies. Marcus tapped his gavel lightly. The sound was soft, but it struck harder than any shout could have. This is not a place where appearances dictate respect. This is not a place where bias will be tolerated, spoken or unspoken. He looked at the bailiff, the guards, the lawyers. Each word a hammer striking down an invisible wall. If you find yourself unable to treat every person who walks through those doors with dignity, regardless of how they dress, how they walk, or how they look, then you have no place in my courtroom. Silence. Total. Complete. Marcus leaned. Back voice softer now, but sharper. Now. Let's try again. He nodded at the court clerk. Call the first case, please. The spell broke. Papers rustled. Chairs squeaked. The room remembered how to breathe again, but no one would forget. Not that day, not that moment, not the man in the hoodie who walked into their lobby carrying more weight, more power, and more truth than any robe could ever sew into his shoulders. Marcus Reed didn't need to punish them. He had already done something far more lasting. He made them see. The first case was called A Young Man, Barely 20, Shuffled Forward in Cuffs, Head Down, Shoes Untied, Eyes Glazed with Defeat. The prosecutor rose sharply. Ready, prepared, aggressive. He rattled off the charges in a loud, practiced voice. Possession, resisting arrest, failure to comply. Marcus raised a hand. Silence dropped over the courtroom like a heavy curtain. Counsel, Marcus said calmly, let's remember that accusations are not convictions. The prosecutor flushed slightly, mumbled, Yes, Your Honor. And just like that, the tone of the room shifted again. Because Marcus wasn't just here to wield the gavel. He was here to redefine the air itself, every glance, every word, every assumption that used to hide in the shadows of this room. He dragged them into the light. The young defendant stood quietly, waiting, expecting the worst. Because boys like him, boys with tired sneakers and folded shoulders, knew how the story usually went. Fast, brutal, forgettable. But Marcus leaned forward, eyed the paperwork carefully, spoke without raising his voice. Mr. Carter, I see a history of school suspensions, a record of missed court dates. The boy swallowed hard, waiting for the hammer. Marcus continued, and I also see you're 1 semester away from earning your GED. The boy blinked, looked up, surprised, as if no one had ever read past the charges before. Marcus tapped his pen once against the desk, a small sound, but sharp enough to cut the room in two. Mr. Carter, today you're being offered diversion, not because you're lucky, but because somewhere, deep down, you chose to finish what you started. This court will honor that. A murmur, a shift, someone exhaled softly in the gallery. Because respect is contagious when it starts at the top. The boy mumbled, "Thank you, Your Honor." Marcus nodded, not grandly, just enough, because not every victory needs a standing ovation. Some victories are quiet, personal, permanent, case after case, the pattern repeated. Marcus didn't coddle, didn't patronize. He held people accountable. But never from a pedestal. Always from a place that said, "I see you. All of you. Not just the worst 5 minutes of your life." Defense attorneys sharpened their arguments. Prosecutors measured their tones. Even the court clerks, who usually tapped away distractedly at keyboards, now sat up straighter. Because when integrity walks into a room and stays standing, you can't help but rise to meet it. By midday, the courthouse was humming a different song. Less judgment, more attention, less assumption, more curiosity. And Marcus, he sat at the center of it all, steady, silent between cases, but in that silence, he was teaching, without ever needing to raise his voice. Because real power isn't in volume. It's in the change your presence demands without a word. By the time the lunch recess was called, even the ones who had laughed at him in the lobby that morning now whispered about him for an entirely different reason. That judge, he's different. And they were right. Marcus Reed was different, because he wasn't interested in being obeyed. He was interested in being understood. And that's a kind of authority no robe can ever grant. You have to build it yourself. Brick by careful brick. The courtroom buzzed after the morning cases. Lawyers shuffled papers. Defendants murmured to family members. Even the bailiffs seemed lighter. Marcus leaned back in his chair, glanced at the docket for the next hearing. And that's when he saw the name, William K. Durant. Old school, old money. One of the most famous and most feared criminal defense attorneys in the state. Durant was known for two things: winning impossible cases, believing he was the smartest man in any room, especially when the judge didn't look like him. The double doors swung open. In strode Durant, tailored navy suit, gold cufflinks, a smirk that seemed permanently stitched into his face. He didn't look at Marcus. Not really. He looked through him. The way you look through someone bringing your coffee. Marcus watched silently, hands folded, expression unreadable. The court clerk announced, "Case number 347B, State versus Holloway." Durant sauntered up to the podium, didn't even glance at Marcus. Instead, he turned slightly toward the gallery. Grandstanding. "Your Honor," he said, oozing sarcasm, "before we begin, I'd like to request the court show a little expediency today." Chuckles from his junior attorneys behind him. Durant smiled wider. We all have more important places to be, after all. The room tensed, a challenge, a power play, a dare, all wrapped up in one greasy grin. Marcus sat very still, let the moment dangle. Let everyone lean in, waiting for the hammer. Then he spoke. Calm, precise. Each word like a carefully placed chess piece. "Mr. Durant," Marcus said, "in this courtroom, no place is more important than this one." The smirk slipped just slightly, but Durant pressed on. "Of course, Your Honor, of course. I simply meant, for a case of this nature," Marcus interrupted, not loudly, softly, sharply. "Mr. Durant, let me stop you there." The gallery froze. Durant blinked, unfamiliar territory. Marcus leaned forward just a fraction, voice steady, measured. "Respect is not a courtesy in this courtroom. It is a requirement. For the defendants, for the victims, for the law, and for this bench." Durant opened his mouth, closed it, because there, in Marcus's eyes, he didn't just see authority. He saw something more dangerous, certainty. The kind of certainty that cannot be bullied, cannot be bought, cannot be shamed into silence. Marcus continued, if you find yourself unable to comply with that expectation, you are welcome to file a motion to recuse yourself. A breath, a heartbeat. But you will not, under any circumstances, treat these proceedings as beneath you. Dead silence. No chuckles now, no smirks, no leaning back with arms crossed. Durant cleared his throat, adjusted his tie, and for the first time, in a long time, William K. Durant simply said, "Understood, Your Honor." The courtroom almost exhaled as one. Marcus nodded once, short, final. Good. Let's proceed. From that moment on, Durant stood straighter, spoke more carefully, chose every word with the precision of a man who finally recognized he wasn't the sharpest mind in the room anymore. By the time the case concluded, Durant approached the bench with none of his usual swagger. Instead, he offered a polite bow of the head, not because he had lost, but because he had learned. And Marcus? He didn't gloat, he didn't preen. He simply returned the nod, because true respect is never about humiliation. It's about alignment. In that courtroom that day, something shifted, not just in Durant, not just in the lawyers, but in everyone who watched a man once judged by his hoodie and his skin stand taller than any suit they had ever worn. The afternoon sun slanted through the tall courthouse windows, a different light now, softer, less harsh, almost as if even the building itself understood. Something had shifted today. Marcus shuffled the papers in front of him. Next case. Final one. Before recess, he scanned the file. Paused, brows knitting slightly. Case number 382A. Tyrone Matthews. Marcus knew the name, not personally, but the type. 18 years old, arrested for stealing groceries and baby formula. No prior record, no history of violence, just desperation scribbled into police reports and dry affidavits. The clerk called the case. Tyrone Matthews stepped forward, hands trembling, baggy sweatshirt too big for his frame, shoelaces dragging, eyes darting, wary, guarded, already bracing for impact. The prosecutor rose, matter of fact, dry. Your Honor, the state recommends full charges, theft in the 3rd degree. No offers. Another day. Another easy conviction. Another number added to the system. Marcus tapped his pen lightly. Mr. Matthews, he said, voice low, even. Tyrone flinched, slightly. Yes, sir? Tell me, why did you take the items? A pause. Silence hanging. You could hear a paperclip drop. Tyrone licked his lips. My little sister, he started, voice cracking. She needed formula. Mom's gone. Dad's locked up. I didn't have no money, I didn't know what else to do. Marcus leaned back, steepled his fingers, let the room sit with that truth. Uncomfortable. Raw. Real. The prosecutor shifted uncomfortably. Suddenly, this wasn't just a file number anymore. It was a person. Marcus spoke. Slow. Careful. Mr. Matthews, the law cannot excuse theft. But the law must also serve justice. Another beat. He turned to the clerk. Is the diversion program still available? The clerk nodded, quickly. Hope flickered across Tyrone's face. Flickered, then hesitated. Because boys like him, they weren't taught to trust hope. Marcus continued. Mr. Matthews, you will enroll in the diversion program. Complete your classes, hold a steady job for 6 months, and stay out of trouble. He leaned forward slightly, eyes locked on Tyrone, voice lowering into something stronger than steel. You do that, and this charge disappears like it never existed. The room exhaled. The prosecutor opened his mouth to argue, but thought better of it, because who could argue against giving a boy a second chance when he hadn't even been given a first one? Tyrone's eyes shimmered. He blinked hard, nodded rapidly. Yes, sir. I promise, I swear. Marcus nodded once, short, final. Good. He tapped the gavel lightly. Next case. Tyrone was led out. But he didn't shuffle now. He walked taller, just a little, like someone whose spine had remembered how to stand up. Because in that moment, in that simple courtroom, with fluorescent lights and scuffed floors, Marcus Reed had done what many forget. Justice isn't just about punishment. It's about possibility, and sometimes the greatest verdict isn't rendered in years or dollars, but in a life set back on its feet. Marcus sat back, tired, but satisfied, because anyone can write laws, anyone can enforce rules. But to hold a human being in your hands and choose to see them, that's a power most people never learn to use. And Marcus? He was just getting started. The courtroom slowly emptied. Footsteps faded into murmurs. Doors swung shut, and for a moment, Marcus Reed sat alone behind the bench. He removed his robe carefully, hung it on the back of his chair, loosened the stiff collar of his shirt. The weight of the day pressed down, but it wasn't heavy. It was earned. He gathered his files, tucked them neatly into his leather satchel, and stepped down from the bench. The hallway outside was quieter now, custodians pushing mops, lawyers chatting in hushed tones, defendants heading out with their heads held a little higher, or a little heavier. Marcus walked calmly through it all. No entourage, no flashing lights, just presence. And somehow, that was more powerful than any security escort ever could be. As he rounded the corner toward the exit, a voice called out. Well, I'll be damned. Marcus turned. Slowly, there, leaning against the vending machine, stood Derek Walker, high school classmate, former neighborhood loudmouth, the same Derek who once sneered at Marcus for carrying books instead of boxing. Gloves. The same Derek who once said, "Ain't no place for dudes like us in courtrooms unless we're on trial." Now, Derek wore a faded construction jacket, boots caked with dirt, hands rough from years of hard labor, eyes a little wider than... Marcus remembered. Derek pushed off the vending machine, walked toward him, shaking his head in disbelief. Marcus Reed, wearing the robe now, huh? Marcus smiled, not smugly, not cruelly, just steadily. Something like that, Derek laughed. A little too loud, a little too forced. Man, I thought you'd end up like the rest of us. But here you are. Gestured vaguely at the marble floors, the high ceilings, the invisible crown Marcus now wore without even trying. Marcus shrugged lightly. Here I am. Simple words, heavy with meaning. Derek rubbed the back of his neck. Guess you showed us, huh? Marcus paused, then said, Wasn't about showing you. He stepped closer, voice low, calm. The same voice he had used all day to reshape a courtroom. It was about showing me. Derek frowned, confused. Marcus continued. Showing myself that I didn't have to fit into the box they built for me. That I could build something bigger. He smiled, soft. Sure. Something better. Derek looked away, ashamed, maybe just realizing that he had spent years shrinking himself to fit expectations Marcus had refused to accept. After a moment, Derek chuckled. Well, you did good, man. He offered a rough, calloused hand. Marcus took it without hesitation, because dignity isn't about holding grudges. It's about knowing when to extend your hand and when to extend grace. They shook once. Firm, brief, real. Derek nodded toward the exit. Go on, man. Keep doing your thing. Marcus clapped him lightly on the shoulder. You too. He turned, pushed through the heavy courthouse doors, and stepped out into the fading gold of a late afternoon sun. Outside, the city moved on, cars honking, people shouting, life buzzing. But Marcus walked through it all, still, anchored, unbothered. Because he knew now, he wasn't just a judge in a courtroom. He was a judge in every room he walked into. And today, he had ruled over more than just cases. He had ruled over perception itself.